She saw the red dot slide across his pale skin and whispered 2 words that saved his life. "Don't talk." What she didn't know, the man with silver hair and crimson eyes was the vampire king of the Eastern Territories. And he hadn't forgotten the waitress whose artists I caught what ancient predators had missed. Hello friends, welcome to our story. Before we begin, please like this video and subscribe. Also, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, we'd love to know. The red dot appeared at 3:17 a.m., crawling across the vinyl booth like a drop of fresh blood. Lillian noticed it before her conscious mind could name the danger. 2 years of observational training from Blackwood Academy kicking in faster than thought, the way light behaved, the way shadows fell, the way wrongness announced itself to those trained to see. The laser settled on the chest of the man in the corner booth, the one who'd been staring at untouched black coffee for 90 minutes. His long silver-white hair caught the fluorescent lights like spider silk. His skin was too pale, almost translucent, and his eyes, when he'd glanced up earlier, had glowed faintly crimson in the diner's dim corners. Her coffee pot hit the floor. The crash shattered the 3 a.m. silence of Twilight Diner. Dark liquid spread across worn linoleum like spilled ink. The businessman at table 3 jerked his head up, and Lillian was already moving, her body remembering what her art professors had beaten out of her. Trust what you see, not what you're told to see. She stepped directly between the booth and the window. "Don't talk," she whispered, leaning close enough to smell something expensive and ancient, leather and smoke, and something underneath that made her think of old cathedrals. "Don't move." The man's eyes met hers. Crimson. Impossibly bright. Ancient in a way that made her breath catch, like staring at something that had watched empires rise and fall. He didn't ask questions, didn't panic, just watched her with the stillness of a predator deciding whether she was threat or curiosity. The bullet came through the window with a sound like the world shattering. It missed Lillian's head by inches, punching through the pie display behind the booth. Glass and cherry filling sprayed across red vinyl. Shards caught the light like rubies. The man didn't flinch, didn't blink, just kept staring at her with those burning eyes while chaos erupted around them. "Everybody down." Lillian's voice cut through the panic. The businessman dove beneath his table. Ramon, the line cook who'd given her this job when she dropped out, disappeared into the kitchen. Then the other customers moved. 5 of them scattered throughout the diner. They'd seemed normal 30 seconds ago, a couple sharing late-night pancakes, a woman reading a paperback, 2 men playing chess near the back. Now they moved with synchronized precision that made Lillian's artist's ice cream wrong. Weapons appeared from jackets and purses. They formed a defensive perimeter around the booth. Around him. Too fast. Too fluid. Too graceful to be human. "Secure the perimeter," the man said quietly, his voice carrying despite the chaos, smooth as silk over a razor's edge. "Find the shooter. Contain witnesses. No casualties." The businessman was already at the door, scanning the street with eyes that reflected the neon signs like an animal's. The couple split up, flanking the windows with movements too quick to track. The chess players had vanished entirely, presumably onto the roof or into the alley. None of them seemed surprised by the gunfire. None of them seemed surprised by anything. Lillian's hands were shaking. Her academic advisor said the tremors would fade eventually. That art school trauma was just her body remembering how to be afraid of judgment. Right now, her body was remembering other things. The weight of her portfolio the day Professor Harwick destroyed it in front of the entire critique class. The way he'd said you see things that aren't there while her classmates watched in silence. The cold certainty that her perception, the thing she'd trusted most, was worthless. She'd been wrong that day. Broken. But tonight. "You saved my life," the man said. Lillian looked down at him. Really looked, the way she used to look at still life compositions, cataloging every detail, designer suit in deep burgundy brocade, probably worth more than 6 months of her rent. Silver white hair that fell past his shoulders, too perfect to be natural. Pale skin that seemed to absorb the fluorescent light rather than reflect it, like he was a void in the shape of a person. A silver cross pendant at his throat, ornate and old. And those eyes, crimson irises surrounding pupils that caught light like a cat's. I saw the dot, she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. The laser. It was wrong. The angle, the color saturation, the way it moved. Observational training, he said. It wasn't a question. Art school. Lillian stepped back, giving him space, her mind trying to process what was happening. Her pattern recognition instinct screaming that nothing about this man was right. I'm out now. Clearly not all the way out. He stood in one smooth motion, adjusting his cuffs with movements too precise to be casual. Each gesture deliberate, controlled, like a dancer or a killer. What's your name? Lillian. Lillian Hayes. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the diner's overheated air. Who are you? Someone who appreciates keen observation. He pulled out a wallet, black leather, worn soft with age, and extracted $500 bills. The paper looked old, the printing style from decades past. He placed them on the table with careful precision. For the damages. And your discretion. I don't need your money. Yes, you do. His voice was gentle but absolute, like a teacher explaining an uncomfortable truth. This diner will need repairs. Your manager will need an explanation. And you're going to need a reason to explain why you threw yourself in front of a bullet for a stranger. The woman with the paperback returned, moving through the shattered glass without making a sound. She leaned close to whisper something Lillian couldn't hear. The man nodded, then looked back at Lillian. The shooter is gone. You're safe. Everyone here is safe. He paused, studying her face with an intensity that made her feel dissected. Thank you, Lillian Hayes. Truly. He walked toward the exit, his people falling into formation around him like shadows following their source. Professional. Military grade. Lillian had seen museum security before, but this was different. These people moved like they were protecting something priceless or something dangerous. Wait, Lillian called out. He stopped, hand on the door, and looked back. She didn't know what made her look down at that moment. Some instinct, some whisper of wrongness that her artist's eye couldn't ignore. The chrome napkin dispenser sat on the counter, polished to a mirror shine. She could see herself in it, pale, shaking, flour dusting her uniform. She could see Ramon peeking out from the kitchen. She could see the businessman slowly straightening his jacket. She couldn't see the man in the burgundy suit. The door stood open in the reflection, but the space where he stood was empty. A void shaped like a person. His security detail cast shadows, cast reflections, but he was nothing in absence where something should be. Lillian's breath stopped in her throat. Every painting she'd ever done of light and shadow, every study of reflection and refraction, every observation about how the world worked, all of it screamed that this was impossible. The man smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. Cold. Knowing. Amused. Smart girl, he said softly. Most people never notice. Then he was gone. The door swinging shut behind him. His security detail vanished like smoke into the pre-dawn darkness. No footsteps. No sound. Just absence. Outside, a black sedan pulled away from the curb without headlights, its windows tinted so dark they seemed to swallow light. It disappeared into the maze of sleeping streets like it had never existed. Lillian stood frozen, staring at the chrome dispenser. At her own pale reflection. At the empty space where a man should have been. Jesus Christ, Lillian. Ramon emerged from the kitchen, flour dusting his apron, his face slack with shock. What the hell was that? I don't know. Her voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. I really don't know. But she did know. Somewhere deep in the part of her brain that had survived Professor Harwick's critique. That made her notice the laser. That saw patterns where others saw chaos. That painted shadows the way they really fell, not the way people expected them to. She knew. The businessman was already on his phone, probably calling the police. Ramon was surveying the damage, running calculations on insurance and repairs. Normal people doing normal things after an abnormal night. Lillian's apartment smelled like burnt coffee and failure when she stumbled through the door at 4:47 a.m. The diner shift clung to her: grease, desperation, and something else now. Something cold that made her skin crawl. She dropped her keys twice before getting the door open, her hands still shaking from adrenaline or shock or whatever happened when you threw yourself in front of a bullet for a man who didn't cast reflections. She kicked off her shoes and stood in the darkness of her studio apartment, breathing hard. The space was small enough that she could see everything from the doorway: unmade futon, kitchenette with its single burner, the corner where her easel gathered dust beneath a paint-stained sheet. Canvases faced the wall like punished children. She hadn't looked at them in 2 years. Hadn't touched a brush since the day Professor Harwick held up her final project in front of the entire critique class and said, "This is what happens when you see things that aren't there. When you trust your instincts over discipline." Ms. Hayes has painted shadows that don't exist. 32 students had watched in silence while he'd torn the canvas, 18 months of work, corner to corner. You see things that aren't there. Except tonight, she'd seen something that was there. A laser dot. A threat. A man with crimson eyes who moved like darkness itself and left $500 bills from 1934 on a diner table. Lillian pulled the business card from her apron pocket and held it under the bare bulb overhead. Heavy black cardstock. Silver lettering that caught the light like liquid metal. You see what others miss. That makes you dangerous. On the back, a phone number and those 3 words in elegant script. Call me. DV. She should throw it away. Should forget the whole thing. File it under weird night shift stories and move on with her invisible life of early morning shifts and student loan payments, and carefully not thinking about the career she'd abandoned. Instead, she propped the card on her windowsill and collapsed onto the futon without bothering to change. Sleep came fast and dark, pulling her under like deep water. She woke to gray morning light and the feeling of being watched. Lillian's eyes snapped open. The apartment was exactly as she'd left it, door locked, window closed, everything in its place. But something was different. Something wrong. Her artist's eye caught it before her conscious mind could name it: the angle of light, the shadow near the door, the sense of displacement that came from years of studying composition. Someone had been here. Her heart hammered as she stood, scanning the tiny space. Nothing missing. Nothing moved. But there, on the floor just inside the door, a rolled piece of paper secured with black ribbon. Lillian approached it the way you'd approach a snake. Slowly. Carefully. Ready to run. She picked it up with trembling fingers and unrolled it on her kitchen counter. The breath left her lungs in a rush. It was a charcoal portrait. Professional-grade paper, museum-quality draftsmanship. The image showed Lillian asleep on her futon, one arm flung over her head, her face peaceful in a way she never felt while awake. Every detail was perfect: the way her hair fell across the pillow, the precise fold of her blanket, the shadows under her eyes from too many graveyard shifts. The artist had captured not just her features, but something deeper. Something true. The exhaustion. The defeat. The way she'd made herself small and invisible and forgettable. It was the most beautiful and terrifying thing she'd ever seen. Her hands shook as she spotted the note at the bottom, written in the same elegant script from the business card: "You see what others miss." Some would kill to keep their shadows hidden. No signature this time. No name. Just the drawing and the warning. Someone had been in her apartment while she slept. Had watched her. Had rendered her with an artist's eye that rivaled anything she'd seen at Blackwood Academy. The level of skill required for this kind of work, the way light played across fabric, the subtle gradations of shadow, the life in the sleeping figure. This wasn't some security detail grunt with a pencil. This was a master. Lillian's breath came fast and shallow. She checked the door, still locked. The window still latched from the inside. No signs of forced entry. No indication anyone had been here at all except for the portrait that proved otherwise. She looked at herself in the small mirror above the sink. Pale face. Dark circles. The same invisibility she'd cultivated since dropping out. The same careful blankness that kept professors from calling on her, kept customers from remembering her, kept the world from seeing her. Except someone had seen her. Really seen her. Seen her clearly enough to capture not just her face, but her defeat. The business card on the windowsill caught the morning light. Call me. DV. Lillian pulled out her phone, then stopped. If she called that number, there was no going back. Whatever this was, whatever she'd stumbled into by saving a man who didn't cast reflections, it would stop being something she could ignore. It would become real. Dangerous. Visible. Her finger hovered over the numbers. Professor Harwick's voice echoed in her memory. You see things that aren't there. But the portrait said something different. The portrait said, you see things others miss, and that terrifies them. Lillian looked at the drawing one more time. At the sleeping woman who'd given up on her gift. Who'd let someone else's fear convince her that her perception was worthless. Who'd been hiding for 2 years in plain sight. She picked up the phone and dialed. It rang once. A smooth voice answered, familiar as silk over razors. Good morning, Lillian. I hoped you'd call. Who are you? Her voice was steadier than she felt. And who is in my apartment? A pause. Then, my name is Darian Volkov. And as for who is in your apartment, that's precisely why you need to call me. Because you've been seen, Lillian Hayes. And in my world, being seen by the wrong people can be fatal. The coffee shop 3 blocks from her apartment had stained concrete floors and espresso that tasted like burnt regret. Lillian chose it because nobody looked at you there, just hunched over laptops and phones, existing in parallel universes of productivity and caffeine dependency. She'd been nursing the same cold Americano for 40 minutes when the 2 men sat down across from her uninvited. The older one wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her rent. Silver hair, sharp features, eyes like chips of blue ice. He set a leather portfolio on the table between them with the careful precision of someone placing evidence. Lillian Hayes, he said. Not a question. My name is Cassius Theron. I'm an elder investigator for the Council of Houses. This is Sentinel Cade Merrick. The younger man nodded. Military bearing, scar across his jaw, hands that stayed visible on the table, the posture of someone trained to appear non-threatening while remaining ready for violence. Lillian's fingers tightened around her cup. I don't know what you're talking about. You saved the life of Darian Volkov 3 nights ago. Cassius opened the portfolio, revealing photographs of the diner. The shattered window. The bullet hole in the pie display. Her, frozen mid-step, coffee pot hitting the floor. A 600-year-old vampire who rules the Eastern Territories through blood succession and systematic elimination of his rivals. The word vampire hung in the air like smoke. Lillian had known, of course, had known the moment she'd seen that empty reflection, but hearing it stated so casually in a coffee shop at 11 in the morning made her throat close. House Volkov controls everything from the Hudson to the Delaware, Cade added, his voice rougher than Cassius's cultured tone. 37 bloodlines. For major cities. When Darian came to power in 1823, he did it by killing the previous blood lord and everyone loyal to him. 73 vampires ash in a single night. The council still hasn't recovered. Cassius slid another photograph across the table. Darian in period dress, standing before a cathedral. The same silver hair, the same crimson eyes. Behind him, bodies hanging from iron chains. He maintains order through fear, Cassius said. Any vampire who challenges his rule simply disappears. He's violated the elder laws regarding witness contamination, territory disputes, and most recently, exposing our existence to mortals. You, specifically. Lillian stared at the photograph. At the man who'd thanked her. who'd left bills from 1934 and a business card that said she was dangerous. What do you want from me? Testimony, Cassius said simply. The council has been trying to build a case against Volkov for decades. You witnessed an assassination attempt on neutral ground. The Twilight Diner is treaty-protected territory where no house may conduct blood feuds. That violation, combined with your testimony about what you saw, what you are, he paused meaningfully. It's enough to bring formal charges. Perhaps enough to force abdication. What I am. Lillian's voice came out sharper than intended. Cade leaned forward. You have the sight. Rare in mortals. You see what we are, even when we don't want to be seen. That laser dot? Most humans wouldn't have noticed until after the shot. You saw it, processed the threat, and acted all in under 2 seconds. That kind of perception makes you valuable. And very, very vulnerable. Cassius produced a small silver charm from his jacket pocket. Delicate filigree work surrounding a blood-red stone. Wear this. It's protection. Any vampire who touches you without permission will burn. It also lets us track your location. For your safety. Lillian didn't reach for it. And if I refuse? Then you're on your own in a world you've just discovered exists, Cassius said. A world where a tyrant knows your name, your address, and exactly how useful you might be to his enemies. 3 nights from now, there's a blood moon. The council convenes. We need your answer before then. They left the charm on the table and walked out, disappearing into the midday crowds like they'd never existed. Lillian sat frozen, staring at the silver charm. At the photographs of Darien, Monster, King, the man who'd smiled at her with those burning eyes and said, "Smart girl." Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. A car will collect you at sunset. We should talk before you make promises you can't keep. DV. The car was a black sedan with windows tinted dark enough to swallow light. The driver didn't speak, just held the door and waited. Lillian climbed in because refusing felt more dangerous than accepting, and because the tracking charm was still sitting on her kitchen counter, unworn. The cathedral appeared like something from a fevered dream, Gothic spires reaching toward the darkening sky, stained glass windows that caught the dying light and turned it the color of blood. Inside, the space had been converted into something between museum and fortress. Original stonework preserved, but modern security everywhere. Cameras, pressure plates, the subtle hum of technology married to centuries-old architecture. Darien waited in what must have once been the nave. He wore dark slacks and a burgundy shirt, less formal than the suit from the diner. His silver hair was pulled back, revealing the sharp angles of his face. Those crimson eyes tracked her approach with the focused intensity of a predator cataloging prey. You met Cassius, he said. Not a question. He said you're a tyrant. A murderer. That you killed 73 vampires to take power. 76, actually. Darien's voice carried no shame, no apology. The previous Bloodlord was breeding mortals like cattle, keeping them in cages beneath the city. When I killed him, his most loyal followers chose death over serving me. I obliged them. He moved to a nearby table where a device sat humming quietly, all LED displays and frequency monitors. Beside it, the silver charm from Cassius. You didn't wear it, Darien observed. Smart. This charm doesn't just track. It broadcasts on a frequency monitored by House Thorn, my rivals. Cassius's employers. You put this on, and every Thorn assassin between here and Boston knows exactly where to find you. Lillian's stomach dropped. Cassius is compromised. Cade Merrick belongs to House Thorn. Has for 3 years. Darien pulled out his phone, showing her surveillance footage. Cade entering a building, meeting with others, exchanging cash. They want me gone. They'll use you to do it. Put you in front of the council, make you testify, then eliminate you before you can recant. Clean narrative. No loose ends. And you? Lillian demanded. What do you want? Darien turned those burning eyes on her. Honestly? I'm a monster, Lillian. I've killed to maintain power. I'll kill again. But I keep worse monsters in check. House Thorn doesn't want justice. They want territory. They want to return to the old ways, when mortals were food and blood courts answered to no one. I enforce the elder laws. I maintain neutral ground. I keep our existence hidden so your species doesn't burn us all. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell leather and smoke and old stone. You have an artist's eye. You see what's really there, not what people tell you to see. So look at me. Really look. Then decide who you believe. Lillian met his gaze. Saw something ancient and tired and absolutely certain. Saw a man who'd watched empires fall and adapted. Saw the monster. Saw the king. Saw the truth in the empty spaces of his reflection. 3 nights, Darian said softly. Blood moon rises. Council convenes. Both sides will want your answer. Choose carefully, Lillian Hayes. In my world, the wrong choice is fatal. Lillian's hands were still shaking when she unlocked her apartment door. The cathedral, the tracking charm, the surveillance footage, all of it churned in her mind like paint water gone muddy. She flipped the light switch and froze. Darian stood in the shadows by her easel, one pale hand resting on the paint-stained sheet she'd thrown over her abandoned work 2 years ago. He looked wrong in her tiny studio apartment, too elegant, too dangerous, too much for a space designed to keep the world small and manageable. Your locks are adequate for mortals, he said quietly. Not for what's hunting you now. Lillian's heart hammered. Get out. In 48 hours, Cassius will contact you again. Darian didn't move, didn't take his crimson eyes off her face. He'll apologize for the tracking charm malfunction. He'll offer you a new one, properly coded this time, he'll say. He'll ask you to return to the diner, to walk through what happened that night. To help his team reconstruct the assassination attempt for the council. And House Thorn will detonate silver-loaded explosives during the blood moon while you're inside. The blast will kill Cassius's entire investigation team. They'll frame me for elder murder, for silencing witnesses, and killing a council investigator on neutral ground. The evidence will be perfect. My rivals will finally have justification to move against me. Lillian pressed her back against the door. Why are you telling me this? Because you're bait. They're going to use you to gut my territory and restart the blood wars. And because he paused, something flickering across his ancient features. Something almost human. You saved my life when you had no reason to. I'm returning the favor. By breaking into my apartment? By offering you a third option. Darian moved then, crossing the small space with fluid grace that made her artist's ice cream wrong, too smooth, too controlled. Nothing human moved like that. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough that she could see the way shadows clung to him like living things. Help me turn their trap around. You wear the charm. You go to the diner. But you go knowing what's coming. Prepared. Protected. Protected how? By me. His voice dropped lower, silk over razors. I mark you as mine. Not as food, as something under my protection. Any vampire who touches you without permission faces me. That includes House Thorn. Lillian laughed, sharp and bitter. You want me to trust you? A vampire. A self-admitted monster who killed 76 people to take power. No. Darian's crimson eyes held hers. I want you to trust yourself. Trust what you saw that night in the diner. Trust the instincts that spotted a laser dot before your conscious mind caught up. Trust the perception that made you step between a stranger and a bullet. Her breath came shallow. My art professor told me I saw things that weren't there. That I couldn't be trusted. That my perception was. Your professor was afraid. Darian interrupted, something cold sliding into his tone. Afraid of someone who saw too clearly. Who painted truth instead of comfortable lies. He turned toward her abandoned canvases, the ones facing the wall like punished children. His pale fingers found the edge of one frame. May I? Lillian wanted to say no. Wanted to keep that part of herself hidden, safely buried under 2 years of graveyard shifts and careful invisibility. But something in his voice, the careful way he asked permission, made her nod. Darian lifted the canvas and turned it to face her. The painting showed the critique room at Blackwood Academy, but rendered all wrong. The lighting came from sources that didn't exist in reality, harsh angles that carved shadows across student faces like blade marks. Professor Harwick stood center, but she'd painted him partially transparent, a ghost wearing human skin. Behind him, darkness pooled like spilled ink, and in that darkness, shapes moved. Predatory. Hungry. Watching. She'd painted her classmates with their eyes downcast, their bodies curved inward, making themselves small. Making themselves invisible. Trying not to be seen by the thing wearing a professor's face. You saw this, Darian said softly. You painted what was really there. A predator. Prey. The architecture of fear. He looked at her then, those burning eyes seeing past her careful blankness. This is masterwork, Lillian. This is truth. And he destroyed it because you made him visible. Lillian's throat closed. He said I saw things that weren't there. He lied. Darian set the painting down with careful reverence. You saw exactly what was there. You just saw it more clearly than he wanted. That's what terrifies people about perception like yours. You see past the masks we wear. You see the shadows we cast. In my world, that gift is rarer than diamonds and twice as dangerous. He pulled something from his jacket pocket. A phone, sleek black, unmarked except for a small silver seal pressed into the metal. He held it out to her. This is blood-sealed. Only you and I can access it. If you take it, you're agreeing to help. You wear Cassius's charm. You go to the diner. But you follow my instructions. Trust your eyes over their words. Trust what you see over what you're told. Lillian stared at the phone. At Darian's pale hand holding it steady, no tremor, no urgency. Just patient waiting. If I do this, she said slowly, and you're lying if this is just another trap. Then you die, Darian said simply. But you're going to die anyway. Cassius will use you and dispose of you. House Thorn will eliminate their bait once the trap is sprung. Your only question is whether you die trusting someone else's narrative or trusting what your own eyes show you. He gestured to the painting. To the truth she'd rendered that cost her everything. You painted this. You saw what others missed. That professor told you it wasn't real because making it real meant confronting what he was. Don't let him steal your voice twice. Lillian looked at the painting. At the shadows she'd captured with impossible accuracy. At the predator wearing human skin. At the truth no one else wanted to see. She thought about the laser dot. The way her body had moved before her mind caught up. The instinct that said trust what you see, not what you're told. She took the phone. Darian's expression didn't change, but something shifted in those crimson eyes. Relief, maybe? Or respect. 2 days, he said. Blood moon rises. When Cassius contacts you, say yes. Wear the charm. Go to the diner. And remember, you see what others miss. That's not a weakness, Lillian Hayes. That's survival. He moved toward the window, pausing at the threshold. One more thing. Don't look away from what's coming. Artists who flinch paint lies. Then he was gone, melting into shadow like he'd never existed. Only the phone remained, heavy in her palm. Blood sealed. A choice made. Lillian looked at her painting one more time. At the truth she'd captured and been punished for seeing. This time, she wouldn't look away. The text came at 2:34 a.m., 2 words on the blood-sealed phone. Car waiting. Lillian pulled on jeans and a jacket, her hands steadier than they'd been 3 days ago. Something had shifted since she'd taken Darian's phone, since she'd looked at her painting and remembered what it felt like to trust her own eyes. The fear was still there, coiled tight in her chest like a living thing, but underneath it ran something else. Purpose, maybe. Or just the cold certainty that she'd already made her choice. The sedan's windows were darker than before, if that was possible. The driver was different too, a woman with sharp features and military bearing who nodded once when Lillian climbed in. They drove south, away from the familiar grid of her neighborhood, into parts of the city she'd only seen from bus windows. Old industrial districts. Abandoned warehouses. The kind of places where people disappeared. The car stopped in front of what looked like a condemned subway entrance, Metal gates rusted shut, graffiti coating every surface. The driver led her to a service door hidden behind debris, then downstairs that went deeper than any subway line. The air grew cold. Ancient. The walls changed from concrete to stone, then to something older, carved granite that predated the city above. "Welcome to the Crimson Sanctum," a voice said from the shadows. Neutral ground since 1847, when the houses nearly burned the city to ash and had to sign treaties in blood to survive. The man who stepped into the dim light had Victor's bearing, all controlled violence and careful courtesy. Dark hair pulled back, eyes that reflected light like an animal's, a scar across his throat that looked old and vicious. He wore tactical gear under a long coat, weapons visible and ready. "I'm Victor Cade," he said, and Lillian's breath caught at the surname. He smiled, cold and sharp. "Yes, Cade Merrick is my nephew. Was my nephew, before House Thorne bought him. Family means nothing when ambition calls." He led her through passages that twisted like a maze, past doors marked with symbols she didn't recognize, until they reached a chamber that made her artist's eye ache with its impossible beauty. Vaulted ceilings disappeared into shadow. Stained glass windows underground, which made no sense, caught light from sources she couldn't identify and painted the stone floor in pools of crimson and gold. A massive table dominated the center, its surface carved with intricate patterns that looked like family trees or war maps or both. 3 people waited there. Darian stood at the head of the table, wearing what she'd come to recognize as his working clothes, dark slacks, burgundy shirt, hair loose around his shoulders. He looked tired in a way she hadn't seen before, the weight of 600 years visible in the set of his shoulders. Beside him, a woman in her 40s studied surveillance photographs with focused intensity. Silver blonde hair, elegant features that would have been beautiful if not for the network of thin scars across her neck and jaw. She wore a pendant with an unfamiliar crest, a thorn wrapped in chains. The third was younger, maybe 25, with dark skin and amber eyes that tracked Lillian's approach with predatory awareness. They wore tactical gear like Victor's, knives visible at hip and shoulder, moving with the fluid grace that marked all of Darian's people. "Lillian Hayes," Darian said. "Meet Elena Thorne, former daughter of House Thorne. And Ash, captain of the Shadow Guard." Elena looked up from her photographs and smiled, but it was the kind of smile that had nothing to do with warmth. "Darian tells me you have the sight, that you see what others miss." "That's what got me into this," Lillian managed. "Good." Elena slid a photograph across the table. "Then look at this and tell me what you see." The image showed a man in formal evening wear, sharp suit, dark hair, cruel mouth. Behind him, barely visible in the shadows, 3 figures in tactical gear. The photograph quality was poor, grainy, but something about the composition made Lillian's perception sharpen. "The man in front isn't in charge," she said slowly. "He's positioned like he is, but look at his hands, defensive posture, fingers curled inward. He's afraid." The figure in the back left, barely visible, that's who everyone else is oriented toward. "That's command." Elena's scarred face split into a genuine smile. "Marcus Thorne, head of House Thorne. 700 years old and vicious as plague. He hasn't been photographed clearly in a century. He knows how to stand where cameras can't find him. But you saw him anyway." She pulled more photographs from a leather portfolio, spreading them across the carved table like tarot cards. Crime scenes, political events, historical images dating back decades. In each one, if Lillian looked carefully, she could find the same shadow, the same positioning, the same careful absence that marked someone who knew how to remain invisible while controlling everything. "House Thorne ruled the Eastern Territories before Darian," Elena said, her voice going hard. "They bred humans like livestock, kept blood farms beneath the city. Children sold to the highest bidder. When Darian moved against them in 1823, he thought he'd ended it. But Marcus survived. Went underground. Spent 200 years rebuilding, buying loyalty, positioning pieces. She tapped one photograph, Cade Merrick meeting with figures in an alley. He bought my nephew. He's bought council members, judges, investigators. And now he's making his move during the blood moon, when elder law requires the council to convene and power is most vulnerable. Victor moved to a map of the city pinned to the far wall, marked with symbols in red and black ink. The diner sits on treaty-protected ground. No house may conduct blood feuds there. It was written into the 1847 Accords after the burning of the Harbor District killed 300 humans and exposed us to mortal authorities. If House Thorne detonates explosives there, killing a council investigator and his team, it violates the oldest law we have. It would give Marcus justification to call for Darian's execution and seize control of the Eastern Territories. Unless we prove he planned it, Darian said quietly. Which requires evidence. Witnesses. Someone who can document what's happening in real time and survive to testify. Everyone looked at Lillian. Ash spoke for the first time, their voice surprisingly gentle. We'll fortify the diner with blood wards, invisible markers that disrupt silver-based weapons and magical explosives. We'll position our people as customers, staff, civilians. When House Thorne moves, we'll be ready. But we need you inside. Need your eyes watching, documenting, seeing what others miss. They'll try to kill me, Lillian said. Statement, not question. Yes, Darian answered. That's why you'll be marked as mine. Protected by blood law. Any vampire who touches you without permission faces me directly. Most won't risk it. Most? Marcus Thorne didn't survive 7 centuries by respecting laws. Elena's voice carried the weight of personal knowledge. He'll kill you if he thinks it serves his purpose. Protection or not. The blood-sealed phone buzzed in Lillian's pocket. She pulled it out, saw an unknown number on the regular screen. Everyone in the chamber went still. That's Cassius, Victor said. Right on schedule. Lillian answered. Put it on speaker. Ms. Hayes. Cassius's cultured voice filled the ancient chamber. I apologize for the delay. There was a malfunction with the tracking charm I provided. We've corrected the issue. I'd like to meet tomorrow evening, walk through the incident at the diner, help my team reconstruct events for the council. Would 8 o'clock work for you? Lillian looked at Darian. At Elena. At the map of the city marked in red and black. At the photographs of shadows and violence and careful absence. Yes, she said. 8 o'clock. I'll be there. Excellent. Thank you for your cooperation, Ms. Hayes. This will help us bring a very dangerous individual to justice. The line went dead. Victor began marking positions on the map, entry points, sight lines, defensive positions. Ash pulled up building schematics on a tablet, their amber eyes tracking structural weaknesses. Elena returned to her photographs, to the decades of intelligence she'd gathered on her former house. Darian stepped close to Lillian, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Victor will train you. Teach you how to spot blood magic, recognize house crests, document evidence that will hold up before elder law. You have 36 hours before the blood moon rises. What if I mess up? The words came out smaller than she intended. What if I see wrong, miss something critical? You won't. His crimson eyes held hers with absolute certainty. Your professor told you that you saw things that weren't there because he needed you to doubt yourself. I'm telling you the opposite. Trust your eyes. Trust your perception. It's kept you alive this long. It'll keep you alive 2 more days. Elena approached, holding a pendant, delicate silver filigree around a stone that looked like frozen blood. Wear this under your clothes. It'll burn if someone tries blood magic near you. We'll know if they move early. Lillian took the pendant. Felt its cold weight settle against her sternum like a second heartbeat. On the far wall, Victor had finished marking the map. Red circles for Darian's people. Black for House Thorne's known assets. And in the center, a single blue mark at the diner where this had all started. Where it would end, one way or another, under a blood moon. The diner looked exactly the same and completely different. Same worn vinyl booths, same flickering neon sign outside, same smell of burnt coffee and old grease. But Lillian's artist's eye caught the wrongness everywhere. The couple sharing pancakes sat too still, their positioning tactical rather than romantic. The businessman reading a newspaper held it at the wrong angle, his reflection in the window showing eyes that tracked every entrance. The line cook, visible through the kitchen window, moved with fluid precision that had nothing to do with short-order cooking. Every customer was vampire. Every position was defensive. The diner had become a stage set for violence. Lillian sat in the same booth where Darian had been 3 nights ago, the new tracking charm cold against her wrist. Cassius had given it to her an hour earlier, apologizing again for the malfunction, his blue eyes kind and concerned and lying. The pendant Elena had given her burned hot beneath her shirt, confirming what she already knew. The charm was loaded with more than just tracking signals. 11:39 p.m. The blood moon rose outside the windows, massive and crimson, turning the street the color of fresh wounds. Cassius stood near the door with 3 other vampires in Elder Guard uniforms, formal dark suits, silver badges that caught the moonlight. Cade lingered near the back, his scarred jaw tight, one hand resting too casually near his jacket. Lillian had sketched his stance mentally during her training sessions with Victor, cataloging the micro-expressions that preceded violence. Right now, every line of his body screamed coiled readiness. 11:43 p.m. The businessman's newspaper rustled. Outside, a black sedan pulled to the curb. Darian entered at 11:47 p.m., exactly as planned. He wore the same burgundy suit from that first night, silver-white hair loose around his shoulders, moving with that fluid grace that made Lillian's perception scream inhuman. His crimson eyes swept the diner, cataloging threats and allies with the speed of something ancient and practiced. When his gaze found hers, something flickered there, reassurance or warning or both. "Mr. Volkov," Cassius said, stepping forward with careful formality. "Thank you for agreeing to meet on neutral ground. The council has questions regarding the assassination attempt that occurred here. Miss Hayes has been kind enough to provide her testimony." "Of course." Darian's voice carried that silk over razors quality. "I'm always happy to cooperate with elder investigations." The words were right. The choreography was perfect. But Lillian's hands were shaking beneath the table, her training replaying in rapid sequence. Watch for shadow distortions, listen for frequency shifts in ambient sound, trust the pendant's warnings, document everything. Cassius gestured to 2 of his guards. "We'll need you to come with us to provide formal testimony before the council convenes." "This is standard procedure for..." The pendant burned like fire against Lillian's sternum. "Now," she said, the word barely a whisper. Everything happened at once. Cade's hand moved his jacket with the speed she'd memorized, the specific angle of his shoulder rotation that Victor had drilled into her during training. Cassius left. But Cade wasn't drawing a weapon. His fingers closed around something small and cylindrical, pressing a trigger that made no sound at all. The tracking charm on Lillian's wrist erupted with heat and light. Not enough to hurt, just enough to broadcast. A signal. A beacon. Silver charges detonated in the walls. The explosion wasn't like in movies. No dramatic fireball, no cinematic slow motion. Just a sound like the world ending and a pressure wave that slammed Lillian against the booth's vinyl back. Glass shattered inward. The fluorescent lights exploded in cascades of sparks. Something hot and sharp sliced across her cheek. She heard screaming. Felt hands, Victor's, she thought, dragging her down and away from the window. Tasted blood and electrical smoke. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard Cassius shouting orders. Saw his guards moving with military precision, forming a defensive perimeter. One of them, a woman with dark hair, took a silver round to the chest and went down, her body convulsing as the metal burned through ancient flesh. Cade had a blade now. Silver-edged, the metal inscribed with symbols that glowed faintly crimson. He moved toward Cassius with predatory focus, no hesitation, no humanity in his reflected light eyes. Lillian's training kicked in past the shock. Document everything. She fumbled for the blood-sealed phone, started recording, her hands steadying with purpose even as chaos erupted around her. The diner's remaining lights shattered in sequence, not from explosions but from something else. Darkness pooled in the corners like spilled ink. The shadows moved wrong, flowing against physics, against reality. Portal magic, Elena had called it during training. Expensive. Illegal under elder law, the kind of thing only major houses could afford. Figures emerged from the shadow portals. 8. 10. More. They wore tactical gear in deep crimson, House Thorn's colors, faces obscured by masks that made them look like medieval plague doctors. Silver weapons gleamed in their hands, blades, crossbow bolts, rounds loaded with the metal that was poison to vampire flesh. Trap, one of Cassius's guards shouted. It's a trap, they're killing us. Darian moved then, and Lillian understood why vampires inspired centuries of terror. He was suddenly just there, between Cade and Cassius, moving faster than human eyes should track. His hand caught Cade's blade wrist with casual strength that bent bone. The silver weapon clattered to the floor. You were family, Darian said, his voice still somehow gentle beneath the violence. Victor trusted you. Cade spat blood. Victor chose the wrong side. The Thorn assassins opened fire. The couple who'd been pretending to eat pancakes moved with synchronized precision, overturning their table as cover. The businessman dropped his newspaper and returned fire with weapons that appeared from nowhere, not human guns but something else, something that made the air shimmer and smell like ozone. Ash materialized from shadow near the kitchen, their amber eyes burning bright, blades in both hands. Silver rounds punched through vinyl and chrome. One of Cassius's guards took a bolt to the throat and collapsed, his body aging rapidly as the silver spread, ancient flesh remembering its true age, centuries catching up in seconds. Cassius stumbled backward, clutching his side where blood spread across his charcoal suit. Not silver, just a regular wound, but bad enough. His face was slack with shock. This isn't, we had authorization, limited force only. You had lies, Darian said, still holding Cade pinned with one hand while his other people engaged the Thorn assassins. Marcus gave you authorization to arrest me. He gave his own forces authorization to kill everyone who witnessed it. A Thorn assassin broke through the defensive line, moving toward Lillian with focused intent. She was bait. She was evidence. She was a loose end that needed eliminating. Victor intercepted the assassin 3 feet from her booth, his scar-crossed throat exposed as he grappled for the silver blade. They went down in a tangle of violence, too fast and brutal for her phone's camera to track clearly. Lillian kept recording anyway. Documented the way Cade's shoulders had tensed before triggering the charges. The House Thorn crests on the assassin's gear. The modified silver rounds, 3 times authorized yield, Elena had warned, designed to kill other vampires. The way Cassius's team fought desperately while Thorn's assassins executed with cold precision. This was the evidence. This was the truth her eyes could see while others saw only chaos. Another explosion, smaller, controlled. Ash had triggered one of Darian's countermeasures. Silver dust filled the air, making the Thorn assassins recoil, their exposed skin burning where the particles touched. In the confusion, 2 of Darian's people closed on the nearest portal, forcing it shut with some kind of blood magic that made Lillian's pendant scream warnings. The battle compressed, condensed, became vicious and personal. Cassius collapsed against the counter, his elegant face gray with blood loss. One of his guards, the last one standing, dragged him toward the back exit. Toward safety or death, Lillian couldn't tell which. Darian released Cade's wrist and struck once, precise and controlled. Cade dropped, unconscious but alive. Captured. Evidence. The remaining Thorn assassins retreated through their shadow portals, leaving bodies behind, 3 of their own, 2 of Cassius's guards. The diner looked like a war zone. Shattered glass everywhere. Bullet holes stitching the walls. Blood on the vinyl booths, some red and fresh, some darker and older and wrong. Silence fell like a guillotine blade. Victor stood over an unconscious Thorn assassin, breathing hard, blood running down his face from a cut above his eye. Ash moved through the wreckage with predatory care, checking bodies, securing weapons. The other vampires, the ones who'd been playing customers, formed a perimeter, watching the shadows for renewed attack. Darian crossed to Lillian's booth. His burgundy suit was torn, splattered with blood that wasn't his own. But his crimson eyes were clear. Focused. Burning with something cold and absolute. "Did you get it?" he asked. Lillian held up the phone. Her hands were steady now, locked into purpose. Every second. Cade triggering the charges. The thorn crests. The unauthorized force. All of it. Good. He offered his hand. Council convenes in 20 minutes. We need to go. Now. Outside, sirens wailed, human police responding to reports of explosions. Time was compressing. Choice narrowing to a single point. Lillian took his hand and stood. The sanctum's restoration chamber smelled like copper and incense. Lillian sat on cold stone while a vampire medic, ancient hands, gentle touch, cleaned the glass cuts on her face with something that stung and then went numb. Around her, wounded fighters from the diner were being tended, their injuries ranging from silver burns to compound fractures that healed while she watched, bone knitting back together with soft crackling sounds that made her stomach turn. Victor leaned against the far wall, his scar-crossed throat now accompanied by fresh cuts from the Thorn assassin. He was talking quietly into a phone, his expression darkening with each passing second. When he hung up, he crossed to where Darian stood reviewing footage on Lillian's blood-sealed device. "Cassius survived," Victor said. "Emergency blood magic. They got him to a safe house before he could bleed out completely." Darian didn't look up from the screen. "Good. We need him alive to testify about Thorn's manipulation." "There's more." Victor's voice went flat. "House Thorn issued a formal death mark an hour ago. They're calling Lillian the human who sees. Her face is being distributed to every bloodline between here and the Gulf. She's infamous now." The medic's hands stilled on Lillian's cheek. The room went very quiet. "Show me," Darian said. Victor pulled out his phone and turned it toward them. Lillian's breath caught. The image was a charcoal portrait, museum-quality draftsmanship, the same style as the drawing left in her apartment. But this time it showed her face in perfect, terrifying detail. Every angle. Every feature. The kind of precision that came from someone who'd studied her carefully. The caption beneath read in elegant script, ** the human who sees what should remain hidden. 50,000 in gold to the house that delivers proof of elimination, **. That's a fortune, the medic whispered. Even old families don't offer that kind of bounty. Lillian stared at her own face rendered in shadow and threat. 2 weeks ago, she'd been invisible, a failed art student working graveyard shifts, carefully forgettable. Now she was marked for death by creatures who'd lived centuries and had endless resources to hunt her. "They're terrified of you," Elena said, entering the chamber with Ash close behind. She looked exhausted, her scarred face tight with tension. "Marcus doesn't spend that kind of gold unless something threatens his power directly. Your testimony, your footage, it proves Elder Guard corruption going back decades. Cade's interrogation is making it worse." "Cade's talking." Darian looked up sharply. "Blood magic compulsion." Elena's smile was cold. "He can't lie under those circumstances. We have correspondence between him and Lady Morgana, Thorn's second-in-command. Financial records showing Elder Guard members taking Thorn gold for 200 years. Testimony about how they've infiltrated blood courts across the Eastern Territories." She paused. "The Blood Conclave is convening an emergency tribunal. They want witnesses in 3 hours." Lillian's hands started shaking again. The Blood Conclave, the highest vampire authority, older than countries, enforcing laws written in centuries of blood and survival. I need to make calls, she managed. My apartment, there's a woman downstairs, Mrs. Chen. She waters my plants. And my old art mentor from community college, Professor Reeves. If Thorne knows my face, they'll know everyone connected to me. Victor was already moving, phone out. Give me names and addresses. We'll have protection details there within the hour. But Lillian was thinking about Mrs. Chen's kind smile when she'd brought soup during finals week. About Professor Reeves, who'd helped her apply for scholarships after Blackwood kicked her out, who'd said your eye is a gift, not a curse. People who'd shown her basic human kindness, now in danger because she'd seen a laser dot and chosen to act. They'll use them to draw you out, Ash said quietly, reading her expression. Thorne plays vicious. They'll hurt anyone connected to you to make you surface. So what do I do? Lillian's voice came out sharper than intended. Hide here forever? Let them turn everyone I've ever known into bait. You testify, Darian said. His crimson eyes met hers with absolute certainty. You stand before the blood conclave and show them what you documented. You let your perception speak truth that elder politicians have been hiding for centuries. You make them see. And then they'll kill me. Maybe not immediately, but eventually. I saw the bounty, 50,000 in gold. That doesn't just disappear because I testified. No, Darian agreed. It doesn't. Your invisibility is gone, Lillian. The moment you stepped in front of that bullet, you made yourself visible to my world. There's no going back to anonymous graveyard shifts and careful blankness. The only direction is forward. Elena spread photographs across the stone table, images from Cade's interrogation, documents proving centuries of corruption, the death mark with Lillian's face. The blood conclave convenes at dawn. They'll hear testimony from all parties, Cassius, what's left of his team, House Thorne's representatives, us. Your footage is evidence that can't be disputed. Your testimony carries weight precisely because you're human. You have no stake in vampire politics. No blood allegiance to any house. You're a neutral witness who saw clearly and documented truth. Which is exactly why they want me dead, Lillian said. Yes. Darian's voice was gentle but unyielding. And also why you're the most dangerous piece on the board right now. Marcus Thorne has spent 2 centuries carefully rebuilding his power through corruption and shadow influence. You saw through it in one night. That terrifies him more than any vampire rival. Lillian looked at the death mark again. At her own face rendered with such precision it felt like being dissected. The artist had captured not just her features, but something deeper, the way she observed, the intensity in her eyes when she really looked at something. They'd painted her the way she used to paint, seeing truth beneath surface appearance. 3 hours, she said finally. I need to clean up. Practice what I'm going to say. And I want protection on Mrs. Chin and Professor Reeves before I set foot in that tribunal. Victor nodded. Already being arranged. They'll have Shadow Guard watching them around the clock. One more thing. Lillian met Darian's burning gaze. After I testify, after the conclave makes whatever decision they make, I want training. Real training. If I'm going to be visible in your world, hunted by vampires who've lived centuries, I need to know how to survive it. I need to see the way you see. Something shifted in Darian's expression. Respect, maybe. Or recognition of something kindred. Then we have an accord. Testimony first. Survival second. And Lillian, he gestured to the death mark portrait. They painted you the way you really are. Dangerous, because you see clearly. Don't let that professor's voice steal that from you again. This time, let your perception be a weapon. Lillian looked at her marked face one last time, then turned toward the chamber where she'd prepare to stand before the oldest powers in the vampire world and speak truth they'd spent centuries trying to hide. The blood moon was setting. Dawn was coming. And she wouldn't look away. The Court of Crimson sat 300 feet beneath the city in a cathedral that predated the streets above. Lillian descended worn stone steps that spiraled down through geological time, past concrete and brick and colonial-era foundation stones, into carved granite that remembered when this land had been forest and native camps. The air grew cold and ancient, carrying the weight of 6 centuries of vampire law written in blood and survival. Victor walked beside her, his presence steady. "Remember," he said quietly, "they'll try to shake you. Make you doubt what you saw. Your perception is your weapon. Trust it." The cathedral doors were iron-bound oak 20 feet high, carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. They swung open silently, revealing a space that made Lillian's artist's eye ache with impossible beauty and threat. Vaulted ceilings disappeared into shadow. Stained glass windows underground, which defied physics, glowed with internal light that painted everything the color of fresh blood. 5 banners hung from stone pillars, each bearing a different house crest: Volkov's silver wolf, Thorne's crimson rose wrapped in chains, 3 others she didn't recognize. Vampires filled the stone benches in silent rows. Hundreds of them. Ancient faces. Burning eyes crimson, amber, violet, silver. Predators who'd watched empires rise and fall, now watching her with focused intensity that made her skin crawl. She was prey walking into a den of creatures who'd perfected hunting before her country existed. The blood conclave sat elevated on a dais carved from single piece of black marble. 7 figures in formal robes, faces hidden behind ceremonial masks that showed only their eyes. The center figure, the magistrate, wore a mask of pure silver that reflected everything and revealed nothing. Lillian Hayes, the magistrate's voice echoed through the cathedral, neither male nor female, ageless as stone. "You stand before the blood conclave as witness to events at the Twilight Diner, neutral ground established by the Treaty of 1847. You have been called to testify regarding violations of elder law. Do you swear to speak truth as you perceived it?" Lillian's throat was dry. Every vampire in the cathedral was watching her. "I do." "Then speak." She'd rehearsed this. Practiced with Elena until the words came automatic. But standing here, alone before creatures who could kill her with casual thought, the practiced speech died in her throat. Instead, she pulled out the blood-sealed phone and let her artist's eye guide her. "I saw Cade Merrick trigger the tracking charm at 11:49 p.m., she began, her voice steadier than she felt. "Specific shoulder rotation, 47 degrees from neutral position." The gesture was practiced, muscle memory from repeated action. He wasn't improvising. He was executing a planned sequence. She pulled up the footage, projected it onto the cathedral wall using Darian's equipment. The explosion in slow motion. Cade's deliberate movements. The House Thorn crests on tactical gear emerging from shadow portals. Those portals, Lillian pointed to the screen. Shadow magic leaves specific visual signatures. The way darkness pools, how it flows against physics. I've studied light and shadow for 6 years. These portals matched residue samples from 17 unsolved Elder Guard murders going back 3 decades. She nodded to Elena, who distributed evidence packets. Forensic magical analysis confirms it. House Thorn signature. Expensive. Illegal under treaty law. Movement rippled through the assembled vampires. Whispers in languages she didn't recognize. "These are lies." Lady Morgana Thorne stood from the house benches, her voice cutting through the murmurs like a blade. She was tall, elegant, with silver blonde hair and a face that would have been beautiful except for the cruelty in her violet eyes. This girl is delusional. She invents patterns where none exist. She sees connections that aren't there. She's an unreliable witness with documented mental instability from her academic failure. The words hit like physical blows. Documented mental instability. The exact phrasing from her Blackwood Academy dismissal report. They'd researched her. Found her weakness. Found the wound that Professor Harwick had opened and was now pressing on it with surgical precision. Her own institution rejected her for fabricating observations. Morgana continued, addressing the conclave directly. For painting shadows that didn't exist. For trusting her so-called instincts over objective reality. Why should we believe someone whose own species declared her perception worthless? Lillian's hands started shaking. The cathedral seemed to tilt. Every vampire was staring at her, judging, finding her wanting. Just like the critique class. Just like that day Professor Harwick had torn her canvas and destroyed 18 months of work while classmates watched in silence. Then she saw Darian. He sat in the House Volkov section, silver-white hair catching the bloodlight, crimson eyes steady on hers. He gave the smallest nod. "Trust your eyes." Lillian looked back at Lady Morgana. Really looked, the way she used to study still-life compositions before fear taught her to doubt herself. She catalogued micro-expressions, the slight tension around Morgana's mouth when she'd said, documented mental instability. The way her pupils had dilated fractionally at the mention of shadow portal signatures. The defensive positioning of her shoulders. The tells of someone who knew she was lying and feared being caught. "You're right," Lillian said quietly. "My art professor told me I saw things that weren't there. That I painted shadows that didn't exist. He destroyed my work in front of 32 students who watched in silence because challenging him was too dangerous." She stepped closer to the projection, pointing at Cade's frozen image. "But I was right about the shadows. I painted them exactly as they fell. He called me delusional because seeing clearly made him uncomfortable. Made his carefully constructed lies visible." She pulled up more footage, Morgana herself, captured by street cameras near the diner 2 hours before the attack. "You were there. Shadow signature matches your personal bloodline marker, House Thorn primary line, identifiable by the specific way darkness refracts around your presence. I documented 17 instances across 3 camera angles." Morgana's face went cold. "Circumstantial. Then explain this." Lillian displayed Cade's blood-sealed testimony, the correspondence, financial records, centuries of Elder Guard corruption. Blood magic compulsion. He can't lie under these conditions. Every word is verified truth. He names you specifically. Lady Morgana Thorne, second in command to Marcus Thorne, primary architect of the tribunal trap. She turned to face the conclave directly. "I'm human. I have no blood bonds to any house. No political allegiance. No reason to lie. My only stake in this is that I saw clearly and refused to be silent about it. That's what terrifies House Thorne, not my evidence, but that I saw past their carefully constructed deception. That I trusted my perception over their manipulation." The magistrate leaned forward. "These are serious accusations with serious evidence. But the question remains, can we trust the observations of someone whose own academic institution dismissed her perception as unreliable?" Lillian felt Victor tense beside her. This was the pivot point. The moment where her past trauma could destroy everything. "My institution dismissed me because I saw too clearly," she said. "Because I painted a professor as predatory and that truth was uncomfortable. Because making him visible threatened the power structure he'd built through fear and silence." She looked at Morgana. "Just like House Thorne operates. Through shadow manipulation and silencing witnesses who see clearly. The only difference is scale." She pulled up one final image, her destroyed painting from Blackwood, the one Darian had photographed during that first night at her apartment. The critique room rendered in harsh shadows, Professor Harwick partially transparent, darkness pooling behind him with predatory shapes moving in its depths. "I painted this 2 years ago. My professor called it delusional. But look at the composition. The shadow architecture. The predatory positioning." She overlaid it with surveillance footage from the diner attack. The same patterns. The same visual language. "I've been seeing vampire shadow magic my entire artistic career. I just didn't have a name for it until now." The cathedral went absolutely silent. Even the whispers died. The magistrate studied both images. "The blood conclave will deliberate. Lillian Hayes, you will wait." They led her to a small chamber off the main cathedral. Stone walls. Single candle. Victor stood guard outside the iron door. Through the thick walls, she could hear muffled voices, the conclave debating, vampire politics conducted in languages that predated modern civilization. Lillian sat on cold stone and stared at her hands. They'd stopped shaking. Somewhere in that testimony, something had shifted. She'd spoken her truth before the most powerful vampires in the world. Had used her perception as a weapon instead of a weakness. Had refused to be silenced by someone using her trauma against her. Whatever the conclave decided, she'd done the one thing Professor Harwick had tried to beat out of her. She'd trusted what she saw. And she hadn't looked away. The conclave deliberated for 3 hours. Lillian sat in the stone chamber counting her own heartbeats, trying not to think about what happened to witnesses who failed to convince ancient predators of truth. Victor brought her water and said nothing, which somehow made the waiting worse. When the iron door finally opened, it was Ash who came to retrieve her. Their amber eyes were unreadable. The magistrate has reached a verdict. The cathedral felt different now, charged with something heavy and final. The assembled vampires sat in absolute silence as Lillian walked the long aisle back to the dais. Lady Morgana stood in iron chains that glowed faintly with blood magic, her elegant face a mask of fury. Cassius was there too, pale and wounded but alive, his blue eyes meeting hers with something like respect. The magistrate's silver mask reflected the bloodlight as they spoke. The Blood Conclave has reviewed testimony, examined evidence under blood magic verification, and consulted the Treaty of 1847. We find House Thorne guilty of elder corruption, systematic treaty violation, and attempted blood coup against House Volkov. The voice echoed through vaulted stone with absolute authority. House Thorne's territorial rights in the eastern region are hereby stripped. Lady Morgana Thorne is remanded to blood custody pending full investigation of her house's criminal enterprise spanning 2 centuries. Morgana's chains flared brighter as she struggled. 2 elder guards moved to restrain her. Her violet eyes found Lillian across the cathedral, burning with hatred that promised this wasn't over, not really. Vampire memories were long and revenge-patient. Furthermore, the magistrate continued, the death mark placed on Lillian Hayes is nullified with immediate effect. Any vampire who harms this witness will face execution by all 5 houses. She is declared permanently protected under conclave law as a treaty witness of historical significance. The words took a moment to penetrate. Protected. Safe. The 50,000 gold bounty erased by decree older than countries. Lillian Hayes, approach. She walked forward on shaking legs. The magistrate descended from the dais, the first time they'd moved, and stood before her. Behind the silver mask, ancient eyes studied her with weighing intensity. Your testimony has exposed corruption that threatened the foundation of elder law. Your perception, uncorrupted by blood bonds or political alliance, proved more valuable than centuries of vampire investigation. They paused. The Blood Conclave wishes to offer you an unprecedented position. We propose creating the role of True Keeper, the first human with official standing in vampire courts. You would testify in treaty disputes, investigate claims of elder law violations, and speak for humans caught in vampire politics. You would have authority to question any house, access to protected records, and the backing of conclave law. Lillian's breath stopped. That's dangerous, the magistrate agreed. You would make enemies. Powerful ones. But you're uniquely qualified. Your artistic eye sees what vampire politics obscures. You cannot be bloodbound or politically compromised. And you've already proven willing to speak truth before those who would silence you. I need to think. You have 3 days. The magistrate returned to the dais. The conclave is adjourned. The assembled vampires rose in synchronized movement, filing out through carved doors. House Thorne's remaining members moved in tight formation around their chained leader. Darian appeared at Lillian's elbow, his crimson eyes unreadable. Come with me, he said quietly. There's something you need to see. He led her through the sanctum's maze of passages to a door she hadn't noticed before. Heavy wood, no markings. He opened it and stepped aside. The room beyond made Lillian's throat close. Natural light, somehow, impossibly, streamed through skylights 300 feet below the city's surface. North-facing windows that defied architecture. An artist's studio, professionally equipped, easels in various sizes, drawers of supplies organized by medium, blank canvases stretched and waiting. Her abandoned paintings from the apartment stood carefully arranged against one wall, no longer facing in shame, but displayed like works in progress. "I had this prepared before the tribunal," Darian said from the doorway. "Before I knew how the conclave would rule." Lillian turned to stare at him. "You believed I'd survive. I believed you'd speak truth." His ancient eyes held hers. "Whether the conclave listened was their choice. But I wanted you to have a space worthy of your gift, regardless of outcome." She walked to the canvases, her paintings that Professor Harwick had called delusional, that captured shadows and predatory positioning she hadn't understood were vampire magic. They looked different here. Powerful. True. The work of an artist who saw clearly and refused to flinch. "The true keeper position," Lillian said slowly. "That's real? Not some political gesture. Completely real. The conclave doesn't make empty offers." Darian moved to stand beside her, both of them studying her paintings. "You'd work with all 5 houses investigating treaty violations, documenting evidence, testifying in blood courts. Dangerous work. You'd see things humans aren't meant to see. Make enemies who remember grudges for centuries. But I'd have a voice." The words came out barely above whisper. "Official standing. The ability to speak for people caught in vampire politics who can't speak for themselves. Yes. And protection. Training. Resources." He paused. "Partnership, if you want it. Not possession. Not ownership. Collaboration between your perception and my knowledge of how vampire politics operates." Lillian touched the edge of her destroyed critique room painting. The canvas Professor Harwick had torn corner to corner before 32 silent witnesses. Darian had it professionally restored, the tear marks visible but mended scars that told their own truth. "I can't go back," she said. "Can't return to invisible graveyard shifts and carefully not being seen. That life is gone. Yes. Everything I built after Blackwood, the safety of being forgettable, the comfort of low stakes, I lost all of it the moment I saw that laser dot." "You traded invisibility for voice." Darian's tone was gentle but absolute. "Safety for purpose. The question is whether that trade feels worth the cost." Lillian looked around the studio, the natural light, the blank canvases waiting, the space built for someone whose eye was trusted rather than questioned. She thought about Mrs. Chin and Professor Reeves, now under shadow guard protection because knowing her had become dangerous. Thought about the death mark with her face rendered in beautiful, terrifying detail. Thought about standing before the blood conclave and speaking truth that ancient predators had spent centuries hiding. She thought about Professor Harwick saying you see things that aren't there while destroying her work. And Lady Morgana using the exact same words, the same manipulation, trying to make her doubt the evidence of her own eyes. This time, she hadn't looked away. 3 days to decide, she said finally. 3 days, Darian agreed. Use the studio. Paint what you saw tonight. See what your hands tell you about the choice. He left her alone with north light and blank canvases and the restored painting that showed she'd been seeing vampire magic her entire artistic career without knowing what to call it. Lillian picked up a piece of charcoal and began to draw. The blood-sealed phone rang at dawn. Lillian had been awake for hours, sitting in the studio Darian had built, watching how light changed as it filtered through impossible stained glass 300 feet underground. The quality was different from natural dawn, refracted through centuries of vampire architecture, colored by glass that remembered blood and treaty and survival. Her artist's eye cataloged the subtle shifts, crimson bleeding to amber, shadow pools retreating like living things. She answered without checking the caller ID. I'll do it. Darian's voice carried a note of something that might have been relief. You're certain? No. Lillian looked at the blank canvas she'd been circling for 3 hours, charcoal in hand but unable to make that first mark. But I'm sure I can't go back. Mrs. Chin deserves to know why Shadow Guard is watching her building. Professor Reeves has my sealed testimony. He'll figure it out eventually. And she paused, trying to articulate what had shifted in the cathedral when she'd spoken truth before ancient predators who wanted her silent. I spent 2 years making myself invisible because someone told me my perception was worthless. I'm tired of hiding from what I see. The conclave meets at sunset to make it official. Until then, you should rest. I need to paint first. Silence on the line. Then, what will you paint? Lillian set down the phone and picked up a brush for the first time in 2 years. The weight felt foreign and familiar simultaneously, muscle memory from 6 years of training, buried under 24 months of careful forgetting. Her hand trembled as she loaded it with paint, mixing colors on a palette, shadow dark and blood crimson, and the particular shade of silver that was Darian's hair catching fluorescent diner light. The truth, she said quietly, though he couldn't hear her anymore. Everything I've been afraid to see. The first brushstroke went down like a scar across clean canvas. Wrong angle, wrong pressure, the rust of disuse making her movements clumsy. But she didn't stop. Didn't second guess. Let her hand remember what her mind had tried to forget, how to translate perception into pigment, how to make visible what others refused to see. She painted the diner at 3:17 a.m., but rendered through the lens of what she now understood. The laser dot crawling across vinyl like spilled blood. Darian in his burgundy suit, his reflection conspicuously absent from the chrome napkin dispenser. The businessman who wasn't a businessman, positioned tactically near the exit. The couple sharing pancakes who moved too fluidly to be human. She painted what she'd seen but couldn't name, vampire security detail disguised as late-night customers, ancient predators pretending mortality, the architecture of protection around something precious and dangerous. As dawn light strengthened, bleeding through stained glass in shades that shouldn't exist, Lillian painted faster. The tremor in her hand steadied. The rust dissolved. 2 years of silence fell away like dead skin, revealing something underneath that had survived Professor Harwick's destruction and careful invisibility and the fear of being seen. She painted herself too, the waitress with the coffee pot, frozen mid-step, body already moving before conscious thought caught up. She rendered her own face with brutal honesty, the exhaustion, the defeat, but also something else. Something fierce. The woman who'd stepped between a stranger and a bullet because her artist's eye had seen danger and her body had trusted that perception absolutely. The door opened softly. Darian entered with 2 cups of coffee, moving with that fluid grace that her brush had already captured on canvas. He stood beside her in comfortable silence, studying the work in progress. "You painted me without a reflection," he observed. "That's how I first knew." Lillian added shadow detail to the chrome dispenser, the negative space where his image should have been. The way wrongness announces itself to those trained to see. And now, knowing what I am, what this world is, does it change how you see? Lillian loaded her brush with fresh paint, mixing the exact shade of his crimson eyes. It makes everything clearer. I've been painting vampire magic my entire artistic career without understanding what I was documenting. The predatory shadows in Professor Harwick's critique room. The way darkness pooled in corners that shouldn't hold shadow. The micro-expressions on faces that suggested something ancient wearing human skin. She added the final detail to Darian's painted eyes, the way they caught light like a cat's, reflective and inhuman. I wasn't inventing patterns. I was seeing what was actually there. I just didn't have language for it. Darian set down the coffee cups and moved closer to the canvas, studying her brushwork with the focused intensity she'd come to recognize as his working mode. The conclave will expect formal documentation. Written reports, photographic evidence, testimony prepared for blood court proceedings. I know. They'll send you into dangerous situations. Houses that resent human interference. Vampires who remember when mortals were food and blood courts answered to no one. I know. Lady Morgana is in blood custody, but but House Thorne still has loyal members. Old grudges. Patient revenge. The death mark may be nullified, but memory is long in my world. Lillian set down her brush and turned to face him directly. In the dawn light filtering through ancient glass, his silver-white hair looked almost translucent, his pale skin absorbing color rather than reflecting it. A void in the shape of a person. A 600-year-old vampire who'd commissioned an artist's studio for a failed art student who'd saved his life. "Why did you really build this?" she asked. "Before the tribunal, before you knew if I'd survive, why prepare a space like this?" Darian's expression shifted, something almost human flickering across ancient features. "Because you painted shadows that existed. Because your professor destroyed your work for seeing clearly. Because perception like yours is rarer than immortality and more valuable than blood." He paused. "And because in 600 years, I've learned to recognize truth when I see it. You're not delusional, Lillian Hayes. You never were. You're dangerously perceptive in a world built on careful lies." The words settled into the space between them like a promise or a warning or both. "The conclave meeting is at sunset," Darian said finally. "You should sleep. The oath ceremony is formal, 3 hours of vampire politics and blood ritual. I'll sleep after I finish this." Lillian picked up her brush again. "I need to see what my hands tell me about what happened. What I walked into. What I'm becoming." Darian studied her for a long moment, those crimson eyes seeing past surface appearance to something deeper. Then he nodded and moved toward the door. "Darian," Lillian called. He paused, hand on the frame, looking back. "Thank you. For believing I'd survive. For preparing this space. She gestured to the painting, to the studio, to the impossible situation she'd stumbled into by seeing a laser dot at 3:17 a.m. "For not making me doubt what I saw." Something shifted in his ancient features. Not quite a smile, but close. "You saved my life by trusting your perception. The least I could do was return the favor." Then he was gone, leaving her alone with dawn light and paint-stained hands and a canvas that showed truth she was no longer afraid to render. Lillian added the final detail, her own hand reaching toward Darian's chest, blocking the laser's path, the moment of choice that had shattered her invisibility and given her voice. She painted it exactly as it had happened, terrifying and necessary and true. Outside the studio, the sanctum was waking. Shadow guard changing shifts. Elena reviewing tribunal documentation. Victor coordinating protection details for witnesses under threat. The machinery of vampire politics turning with efficient precision. But in this space, with north light that shouldn't exist and blank canvases waiting, Lillian was just an artist picking up her brush after 2 years of silence. Trusting her eyes. Painting truth. Making visible what others refused to see. The invisible waitress who'd saved a vampire king was gone. In her place stood the true keeper, the first human with official standing in vampire courts, the voice that could not be silenced, the perception that would document what 6 centuries of vampire politics had tried to hide. She picked up fresh canvas and began again. There was so much truth left to paint.